Hello, everyone. Ani Sego. We are here today with Tanya, myself, Kristen, and our elder Rick from Six Nations. And we want to discuss some Indigenous learning styles with you. So first, we're going to start. Rick is going to talk about some traditional transfer and his experiences with learning, and then kind of move into some assessment and discussion on the various learning styles. And from there, we'll discuss how to respect them in the classroom as well. So I'm just going to hand over our discussion over to Rick.
Well, Nyawe Scano, Guaguego. Nyawe means I'm thankful. Scano, that you are well. Gaguego applies from me to all of you. Today, we're going to talk about learning styles. And it's important because each one of us has a learning style, and sometimes they can be very different. Sometimes brothers and sisters can have very different learning styles. But if we go back in time, what was it like a long time ago in the old longhouse villages of the Haudenosaunee? You had to learn things. You had to be able to become well versed in things. But the old people used to believe that each one of us was born with a special kind of gift. And that gift would determine the nature of your life. Some people could have a good memory. Some people could make good moccasins. Some people could sing well, all of that kind of thing. So I'd spend a little bit of time watching the kids, getting an idea where their inclination was, and then being supportive towards that inclination. You know, the thought was not everybody can do everything. Not everybody can know everything. So it's better to have a variety of people knowing different things, having different skills. That's what holds your society or your collective together. So in the old longhouse days, it basically was learning by observing, by contemplating, and by doing. Here's a good example. It came time to plant. You'd go and you'd watch what your mother would do, what your aunties would do, and your elder siblings would do, and then you slowly find your way to realize, oh, that's the kind of things we have to do, and you'd be mentored along the way. If you'd made a mistake or you didn't quite understand something, somebody would come along and to help you understand that, check to make sure you know how to do it, and keep you on kind of like on task and on the ball. And this way, everybody learned a variety of skills, but also you learned what part of that becomes your identity, what's important to you. So you think about singing. Not everybody can sing, and not everybody can sing well. Although we all can sing, usually in the privacy of our own shower, but we can sing. So in our society, because some people then had a natural ability to sing, and we would support that learning, we would teach them all the traditions about singing, about the songs, what they mean, how to sing them, and then they would share their skill for the benefit of the whole society. How much fun it is to dance together around a good song. At the same time, you'll see a bunch of singers, and you'll have your two lead singers, and then they'll kind of go down that way. People who are probably going to be the lead singer in the future, and then maybe at the end of the bench, the young guys, the kids who are just starting to learn. And sometimes they're a little offbeat. Sometimes their voice has a little inflection to it, but that's how they're learning. They don't make fun of people as they learn. One time I was in Pueblo country out in New Mexico. When they have their ceremonies, they close the whole village. Everybody gets out there and dance. So you see the older skies in front, and more seasoned dancers, a long line all the way down to the little toddlers at the end. So it's about observing and participating and learning as you go. Now you may learn, they're like making pottery. That's just not for me. I just can't make it work. I just can't do it no matter how much I try. Well, that's okay too. Well, then you move on to something else, something else. Certain people are creative with their hands. Certain people are creative with their minds. And then there's also people who are creative, we'll say, with their spirit, their ability to do things well, to build good relationships. So that's all part of that indigenous learning. The difference would be if it was 1,000 years ago, we had to learn how to make everything in our community. You can't run to Walmart, you can't run to the grocery store. So you have to learn basic life skills. You have to learn how to protect yourself. Here's a good example. When the world was made, certain medicine plants were made for our benefit. And But because of the nature of the world, the creator and his brother called Flint, sometimes there's a duplicate plant. It looks exactly like the medicine plant, but if you eat that other plant, it's going to cause you some harm. So you always need an expert mentor to tell the difference between the two. And I think that's the other part of Indigenous learning. You never can learn enough. Some knowledge is just meant for certain minds, and they hold it for the benefit of others. Like I said, you don't need to know everything. And then because it's like trial and error, you find out what you're good at, and slowly you're mentored in it, you become better at practice at it. And really, as a young person, you become the teacher for the next generation. Transferring knowledge is very important. The other thing our old people used to say is that the knowledge already exists in each one of us. When we were born, it's like the creator's fingerprint inside of our body. It's within our DNA is everything we need to know. Life experience helps to unravel that, bring it out to the forefront. And since we've been colonized, we got to remove a whole lot of colonial gaze, but that knowledge is still there. The knowledge is in the trees, it's in the earth, it's in the water, it's in the animals, it's there. It never disappears. And knowledge is one thing. The next part, I guess, is the wisdom. How do you apply this knowledge? How do you learn its deeper meaning? Well, it takes time, contemplation. So storytelling was an important part of our learning. People would gather around the fire, particularly in wintertime, and share these stories. The stories explain how things came into being, what experience of the past were like. But the other thing I like about our stories, it also talks about how young people were able to defeat monsters, or able to figure things out, were able to ensure our survival. A lot of it was put on the shoulders of young people back then. And they had magical powers. They were able to do extraordinary things. So these stories are an important part of our tradition. In our society, we have these wampum belts that are made out of shell beads, and white and purple with symbolic designs. Each generation would have an oral historian, somebody who remembers the memory of that belt, and that would help in that. So we had kind of longhouse learning, the practical things about how to manage your life, how to make everything you need, clothing, tools, pottery, knowledge about planting and harvesting and gathering. But you also then had this knowledge that came from these stories about how things used to be, why they are the way they are, and what we do. And then there's certain knowledge in the ceremonies themselves, in the teachings around that, and the words they share there, that helps you kind of figure out what your place is in with the larger life. So all of that comes into play. And then there's just the practical experience of having to deal with birth, usually in the home, the rites of passage that help people understand where they are in their life, and ultimately then with the death and the burials and all of that meaning. So it was a practical, emotional, spiritual forms of learning that was passed on. And I think that's what made our people strong. Once we started sitting in a classroom reading books, we became very confused. And that's been our struggle, as we all know, in education, is that maybe that style of learning, sitting in rows, having a book, having to read, having to do tests, are just not part of that DNA knowledge inheritance that we have. And so we may have to seek other ways of learning. That's what we're going to look at today. So I thought I'd give you a couple of examples for myself. I learned how to hunt from my father, my older brothers, and from older men, particularly old Seneca men. We'd go down to Allegheny, down in the southern tier, learn how to hunt deer. Now, our ancestors have been hunting deer for, ever since there were people. And we used to like to hunt with a bow and arrow because it connected us to our ancestors, even though it wasn't the same kind of bow and arrow, just this idea of developing this relationship. And what I learned was a couple of things. First of all, that you had to know the deer, the patterns of the deer, the habits of the deer. You had to know the landscape. You had to kind of visualize where the deer are going to be. You look for the signs in the ground, and look for what they're doing. But you also had to know yourself. What are you capable of doing? With a bow and arrow, you got to be close to a deer, usually about 30 yards. With a gun, you can be 200 yards away. So there's something about learning how to be in the woods, so that you don't scare away all of the animals. And then there is something, as funny as it sounds, is to kill efficiently, meaning had to know where to shoot the deer, how to shoot them so that they wouldn't suffer, because that deer is giving up its life so that you can have something to eat, or you can make clothes, or you can make ornaments or rattles. So there's a respect between you and that deer. You don't just go shooting them, you just don't willy-nilly in the woods. And so you learn how to kind of come in harmony with everything around you. And to me, that's the kind of the beautiful part about hunting. So that even if you don't get something that day, that experience of being totally part of the woods, watching the animals as they exist, see what's going on, you learn things. As an example, blue jays, for whatever reason, they're some of the noisiest birds in the woods. And when you come in the woods, they start squawking almost as if they're saying, "What are you doing here? This is where we live." But after a while, if you settle down, you wait. So pretty soon you're going to hear that blue jay off in the distance because he's telling you something else is coming. It could be a deer, it could be a bear, it could be another human. So they give you a signal to do it. You had to learn where to stand and how the wind is going to affect the smell you have and could chase the deer away. There's a whole bunch of things going on. But that was kind of learning by observation, by the example that my hunter mentors gave me, and then just the practical experience of that. I also learned about how to garden from my father. My father, both of my parents, they grew up on a farm back in the old days where you had to grow all your food. Well, my dad became an iron worker, but he always wanted to have a farm. That was his connection to his ancestors and to his life. So he taught us how to plant, how to cultivate, how to prepare the field, how to harvest. And then my mother would teach us about cooking. And there's something about that when you're doing things like that, the essential parts of putting food on your table, it connects you to what the ancestors said. Now, we never did ceremonies, we never went to the longhouse when I was young, but we were doing this vital function of connecting to the earth. And my dad taught me. My dad was a rugged man. He was an old Mohawk iron worker. He was a boxer. He was a deep sea diver. He was a combat veteran. But he had such loving attitude towards corn seed, to hold it preciously because of it represents life. So I often think about that when I plant today. I think about my dad's words and the things that we did when I was a kid, and I'm trying to create those good memories in my own children. And the last thing is I actually went to art school. All my life I've been told I was going to be an artist. I'm 70 years old and still waiting for it to kick in. But anyway, I've often have this creative thoughts about things. Now in school, they can teach you the history of art, the principles of art. They can teach you how to manipulate materials, clay and paint, and how to use certain tools, but they really can't teach you how to make art. They just set the stage, and what they say is, look at what other people have done. Think about what they do. And then it's a matter of coordinating what's in your head with your hands, and I dare say through your heart, through your spirit, that you begin to make things. Now, sometimes we make things that look exactly like what our ancestors made because you must say that's our commonality. Other times we make things that are slightly different from what they made, and then we can also make things that are totally new from them. So you have to have that innate skill to be developed. So you can learn all of the steps of making art, but unless you have the motivation. Now get this, I told you my dad grew up on a farm, became an iron worker, went to war. At the age of 55, he said, because one of my brothers got killed in a car accident, he said to himself, there must be more to life than making a living. And he went to Alaska and went mountain climbing, saw an eagle for the first time in his life. Something happened to him up there. So when he came down, he decided to sell his company, his construction company in Buffalo, New York, and decided to start carving. The first thing he carved with the steel nuts that they found on the job, he made rings out of them, began to make carvings. My uncle, Duffy Wilson, he was a carver, a stone carver. He gave my dad some antlers. So here, try carving these. And at the age of 55, a whole new person was born. And my dad was able to make a living through his art from 55 to 80 when he passed away. I passed away at 82. So nobody would have ever guessed that my dad had that kind of talent in him. And I think that's the other thing about learning and about, you could say, a traditional philosophy is you got to seek that inner gift. You can't let it be clouded by colonization, by what everybody else tells you you should be doing. You got to find that, as we say, find your path and then walk courageously on it. it was a big risk for my dad to decide to become an artist. And yet, when the things that he carved about were the corn, for the woods, for the animals, for his mother, my mother. So he became a very great artist as a result of exploring this inner voice, you can say, that he had here. And I think that had a lot to do with the traditions of our people. I don't know, is there any other questions or comments about that, Tanya or Kristen? Anything else about traditional style of learning that you'd want to share?
Yeah, just on that idea of it being very spiritual and intentional, very practical. It was something that I noticed one time um, when I was building a sweat lodge. It came to me one time that I realized that when I first started coming to the lodge, that I would watch everyone else and what they were doing. And eventually I would come and I would start to join in, and I would take direction from the other women and I would start doing. And that progressed into me not just doing. Now I knew what to do, so I would just pick it up. I would take the initiative and I would go and I would just do what needs to be done to prepare that lodge. And then that progressed into me helping other young women who are coming up and don't know the lodge, in showing them what needed to be done for that lodge. So that really, I think I was doing those things when all of a sudden that realization for me happened, that this learning path, this traditional transmission of learning that occurred very, very naturally, and followed. Like, I didn't learn these things until I was ready to learn them. Nobody pushed me to learn them. They were there, and I gradually grew into it. And it's very, very different than sitting in a class and having them say, this is what you're going to learn by this time, and this is how fast you're going to learn it. And I think that understanding that about who we are spiritually as learners is very empowering when we go to sit in a classroom, because when we understand that, we can begin to not feel so burdened by the difference in delivery. So it's just a little bit of my own experience and insight on what you're talking about.
Well, that's good. Any other comment or?
Oh,
Yeah,
Kim.
we'll move on to this. I'm going to share with you. Oh, I'm going to share with you a native learning style assessment tool that was developed by some friends of mine, including a woman named Diane Hill here from Six Nations. And this is this is an assessment tool to help you look at yourself and try to figure this out. It's kind of a fun thing. It's not scientifically accurate, so don't get too freaked out by how it might end up, but it's just an idea of thinking that there are different kinds of learning. So let me call up my PowerPoint here, and then we can begin to look at that. Oops, let me see. Well, it starts actually a long, long, long time ago. Then, during the time of the Greeks, they developed this theory that there were four things within your body that determines your health: black bile, yellow bile, it's blood, and your phlegm. So you think of it as the different elements of the earth, fire, air, and water. That's kind of interesting, because who would have thought the old Greeks had kind of a very indigenous attitude about this, that each of us is a little different. We're driven by different things, but they thought you could turn that into a kind of a medical plan based upon what kind of person you were, what kind of medicine that you would need. And so these four elements, we often talk about four, the sacred circle, the medicine wheel, the four directions, the four colors. This kind of idea goes back a long way. The difference would be if there's like 4 different physical characteristics of that kind of person. I'm not too sure about all of that, but the idea is that there's a variety in which the way people think. Then in the early 1900s, this guy named Rudolf Steiner, who developed this Waldorf form of education, took that idea and developed it a little further to these 4 temperaments, that there are 4 kinds of people. There are 4 different ways in which they need to learn. So the first one, somebody's choleric, a person who is fulfilled by the deeds, by the things that they do. Second one, sanguine, the person who is more sociable, the one who likes to kind of talk to people and kind of work within groups. And we have another one who thrives on solitary time. They like to be alone, they like to contemplate, they like to reflect on things. And then there's also the melancholic, the person who tends to think and feel things at a deeper level. Well, I'm sure with this quick list, there's a little bit up in each one of those. So it becomes a question of which one kind of dominates how we should learn. And sometimes the way schools are derived, it's as if there's one learning style, and we sometimes forget that there are many ways in which we need to learn. But what Steiner did is develop these ones here. So sanguine personality is a little forgetful, they're kind of talkative, they're cheery, but they're also innovative. They're very loving and forgiving. The choleric one is strong, well organized. Usually leaders come from there. They can be a little hot-headed, like a fire, and they can be a little aggressive sometimes, and easy to anger and unforgiving. Now, again, we could probably see parts of us in each one of these. We know people like that. The melancholic has is more empathetic, and finds that they're more sympathetic. They care more, but they can also be a little bit more fearful and kind of like emotionally demanding. And that can in turn into self-loathing, somebody who carries a grudge for a long time. The other one appears to be lazy. Likes to eat, be stubborn, comfort. Uh-oh, this sounds more like me all the time. You can be loyal, be peacemaker, loving, steadfast. So what I'm getting at is Steiner developed mental characteristics. He developed these characteristics based upon this concept. What he said that you need to break up a class into these 4 groups and have a teacher who has those same characteristics lead those children. And in Waldorf style of education, kindergarten teacher is the same teacher you have all the way till senior grade, because you're building this connection community. Okay, so I don't know how all of this would work with us. But this native learning styles that they came up with divides it into 4 basic styles. Now there are other ways of looking at learning styles, but for the sake of this discussion today, let's take a look at these 4 things. Now, remember the other one, the Greek one, was into the body elements. Well, this one gets back more to our medicine wheel. So we have the physical, the body. That's about doing. You learn by acting on it. You have to act it out. You have to be physically involved in learning something. Intuitive learner, a little bit more spiritual. One who has the visioning, you can envision this thing. So that's how you learn, because now you can see how it would make sense. Then you have the relational or the emotional learner, who has deep feelings and learns by relating to it, just like with my dad and his farming or planting. And it relates back to how he was young, but also relates back to all of those planters in our history. And you have the mental learners, the ones who use their mind to seek understanding. And it's kind of like you have to know that. And it's not, each one is very broad. Sometimes they overlap. And like I said, we could probably see a little bit of all of this in each one of us. But let's start here, just like I mentioned. So first of all, think of 3 things that you enjoy learning. Ask yourself these questions. What are they, and why did you enjoy them? And how did you learn them? So just take a few minutes to think about that. If you have a piece of paper, you might want to jot that down, just so that planting and making art. These things have you enjoyed learning about? What are they? Why did you enjoy them? And how did you learn them? We're not going to share this. This is just for your own sense, to get your own sense of how you learn. Just give you a minute to take a look at that. In this assessment tool, they then ask another question. What is it important for you to be able to talk about what you're doing? I thought about this first. I was thinking like, well, what does that really mean? Well, it's true. Some people, as they're learning, they're talking. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't realize that. I knew that was true. Others, upon reflection, yesterday in class, we said this, we shared this idea. I've been thinking about that and it really makes a lot of sense. Or no, I disagree with that totally. And some, they don't talk about it at all. There's no kind of way that they share what they're learning, what they're doing. So each of us have our own individual style. I guess kind of it depends on the nature of what we're learning. Now, what I'm talking about learning here is like there's somebody there who's trying to pass knowledge on to you. It's not like, you learn not to fire because you get burned. This is different. It's when somebody's trying to teach you something or share with you or transfer this knowledge to you. Anyway, let's get on to this tool. Now, I suggest you get a sheet of paper. We'll keep track of this because we're going to have to score that at the end. There's 10 questions we'll run through. And I would say this is like just off the top of your head. Don't think about it too much. What answer resonates strongest with you? So you'll just write down one and then whatever letter best address it. So how do you learn best? You can pick one of these. Do you A, learn working on your own, taking your own time? Or B, from an instructor's lecture? C, from an instructor that works personally with you? D, from working in small groups of people that you feel comfortable with? E, from practical application? F, from following directions? And G, from a small group of people with instructor available for questions. So just write down your quick response to one. Number one, and list one of those letters. So this will be quick because it's just really off the top of your head. Don't think about it too much because usually your first answer is the best one. Number two, what helps most in your learning? And put these, rank these in importance, and just because we have many different ways, and then you're going to pick your top one. So is having your own routine important? Or B, talking with others while learning? C, being able to take time to learn? D, having fun while you learn? E, being able to practice what you're learning? And F, getting support and encouragement from your instructor, from your people at home. Which one of those is the most important on how you learn? You could put them in order, but you're going to pick the top one. That'll be the letter that you choose. Okay, I don't want to move on too fast, but make your choices, make them quick. Number three, what first occurs to you when you are learning something? Pick one of these. A, remembering something you once did that was similar. B, thinking up a picture of how something ought to be. Or C, getting as much information as you can about a topic. So what first occurs when you are learning something? Just pick one of those, A, B, or C. Don't forget to put down number three in the letter. Number four, what is the easiest part of learning for you? Now just pick one of these. Is it easier to begin something? Or is it easier to be working on the details and practicing it? Or C, is it easier to complete something? It's the easiest part of learning for you, A, B, or C. And then we go to the opposite. What's the most difficult part or stage of learning for you? The same options. Beginning something, working on details and practicing, or completing something. So number five, A, B, or C. Number six. So you're going to complete this sentence. In putting together something, I pick one of them. A, read instructions first, then look at the pieces. B, look for the pieces, then read the instructions. C, go back and forth between instructions and putting them together. E, look at instructions, but make up my own way of putting pieces together. C, try to put the pieces together first, then if it doesn't work, look at the instructions. So which one of those is really the way that you usually do things? Okay. Number 7, in what order do the following skills come into your learning process? Rank these according to 1, 2, 3, and you're just going to list the number 1 you put on. So what are the following skills? Thinking, assessing, or doing? Put those in order, how you go about learning. So you're just going to write 7 and then whatever letter it represents the top of your ranking. Number 8, how do you best learn mechanical or technical things? So you're just going to pick one of these. A, tinkering with it. B, so sorry, 2 B's, having someone explain it to you. C, reading the instructions. D, watching someone, then doing it yourself. How do you best learn mechanical or technical things? Pick one. Number 9, how do you best learn ideas or theories? You just pick one of them. So these are the bigger ideas. These are the A, talking about them. B, working on applying them. Or C, reading about them. For you personally, what's the best way in which you learn ideas or theories, the big picture kind of things? Just pick one of those. Okay. Number 10, how do you know when you have really learned something? Which can be a struggle sometimes. Pick one. I feel comfortable doing it again, whatever it is you learn. I show or tell my family and friends what I can do. Or C, I want to move on to something new. Given those options, which one best reflects how you know when you have really learned something? Just pick one. So did you get something for all 10, or do we need to go back to them again? Sorry, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I've got all my 10 filled out.
Tanya, you with us?
Yes, I'm done. I have mine filled out.
Okay, so let's look at how to assess them. So you're going to give a letter to each of your answers based upon the answer you've done. P would mean physical, M would be mental, and they have here ER, which is emotional or relational. So for the first one, number 1, how do you learn best? Whatever next to that answer. You see a couple of them have several letters, so write them all down. And we do the same thing. We're going to do it on each of these 10 questions. And so what helps you learn best, whatever letter answer you wrote down, give yourself the letter assessment. In the end, we're going to total up all of the letters. So that'll give us an idea of what kind of learning style you have. So number 3, what first occurs when you're learning something? If you check A, you write down ER. If you check B, you write down P. If you check C, you M. And the same for number 4. Okay.
Yep.
And we just continue on. 5 and 6. Whatever letter your answer, that is your corresponding physical, mental, or emotional relational answer. Okay, let's go 7 and 8. Same thing. And then the last 2, 9 and 10. Now you're going to tally up all of your letters. So all of the P's, write down how many there were, how many M's, how many ERs there were.
That's interesting. I got a tie.
Yeah, so the highest number shows your learning style according to this assessment. So you either have more number P's and more number M's and more number ERs. If you score the same for each letter, or they're all pretty closely grouped, then you would be considered an intuitive learner because you have a little bit of all of the learning styles that we discussed. When I first took this test, I was quite surprised because I thought for sure, I was a certain kind of learner, and then the test said otherwise.
You really would have to know yourself as a learner. What would help you to learn these things, knowing what to pick, C,
Yeah.
A. You'd have to, there's a lot of self-awareness in there.
Yes, and it's a judgment call. And one day you may feel one thing, and next day might feel something else. So that's the nature of it. So what did you end up? What was your highest number, Kristen?
So I had 4 for each of the emotional, relational, and the physical, and then 2 for the mental.
Oh yeah.
I was tied between the
So
P.
again, it gives you a little bit closer to some intuitive ability. How about you, Tanya? What did you come up with?
Well, I had 2 of the mental and then 5 emotional, relatable, and then 3 physical.
And I'll tell you, generally, when Indigenous people take this assessment tool, they score pretty much that we're very strong, emotional, relational learners. We have a lot of a bit of physicality. We have to learn by doing, seeing, being involved in that. It's not that we're not mental learners, but that's just that style of learning is lower usually on our preference. Schools, however, generally focus on the mental learning, sometimes to the detriment of the other one. So you can see where sometimes it's very difficult. Well, let's talk a little bit. I think that was the end of the slideshow. Let's talk a little bit about the characters of each of these. And I'm going to have to turn to my cheat sheets on that. And think a little bit about this then, how it kind of relates to you. So let's look at relational emotional learners. We're aware of our feelings. We learn by relating to other people or things. It's all about relationships. We like a dialogue rather than a monologue or somebody telling us what to think. We also like variety in the things that we think about and do. We're very good at hearing and listening to what other people say. We're also very creative in how we respond to those things. We may need a little help in delegating authority because, you know, we're so tied up to what it is that we're learning. And we do need physical exercise. That sometimes you get so wrapped up in your emotions, you need that physical activity to get out and either work off some steam or help your, you know, sometimes just walking helps you reflect on your thinking. So because we may need help to release stored up feelings. So an emotional relational learner has so much emotion, so much feeling that sometimes, it can kind of clog you up. Let's take a look then at physical learning. We take in everything, you know, we look all around us, everything that's in our environment. We learn by observing what others are doing. That's kind of the old practice that I mentioned in the beginning. But we also need time to digest information. You know, what's one of the problems with school and reading? It's fact after fact after fact, and they expect you just to kind of regurgitate the fact. Sometimes we have to think about that. We can think all week on just one word. What does that word really mean? A physical learner usually uses fewer words. This again, they're more about the activity. They tend to be very down-to-earth people, very pragmatic, practical, and very kind of concrete. Sometimes maybe they don't think in great philosophical terms. But they also like groupness, closeness, family, community. On the other hand, even though they don't use a few words, some of them may be overloaded with too many words, you know, the physical, almost like forcing your presence on somebody. And you need to express their individual opinions and feelings. The physical learner, and often very animated, like I like to use my hands when I talk, in that kind of way. Or a mental learner, now the mental learner has strong values and it learns according to those values. So there's certain beliefs that you have and you kind of like, you want to reinforce those beliefs. You're always looking at the big picture, the overview. You can tend to be a little overly objective, not want to deal with emotions or subjective matter. Sometimes the mental learners, though, are very visual, as you're imagining it in your mind. And mental learners tend to be solitary, that like to work alone, but they also like to direct others and be your leader. But they may need help in quieting their mind and getting in touch with feelings. And when I first read that, I thought, boy, that's really true. Sometimes I get so wound up. I say so busy. I keep thinking about something, you know. And one time, a naturopath told me, you have to learn how not to think. I don't know. I don't think I can do that. But learn how to quiet your mind down and not get so worried about it and get back in touch with. Sometimes we keep our mental thing going to cover up what's on the inside here, or not to deal with the emotional feelings. And you may need help in forming relationships. Again, these are just kind of broad categories. Let's take a look at the last one. That is, in case you are an intuitive learner, it means that you're very aware of the purpose, the meaning of life, or why we're doing the things. You're really into that motivation. And you learn to integrate what you already know and the feelings about what you're doing. So intuitive learners integrate all of that stuff that we talked about in the other ones. But you also need some time to digest information. You don't just take it face value, think about it, and you have this inner process of reflection, meditation, and can be some creativity, how you apply that. Sometimes you use few words, you think more in visual terms, you like to draw pictures. I don't know, either of you, like when I'm sometimes attending a lecture, I have a tendency to start doodling. And I doodle if I'm bored with what they're saying, or I'm doodling inspired by what they're saying. But I have to make these drawings. When I go back and look at my notes and I see these doodles, sometimes I said, oh yeah, I remember what they talked about just by looking at the drawing. Other times I'll say, I must have been really bored because that drawing makes no sense of what they were talking about. Intuitive learners feel connected to the world and all of the elements of the universe. And sometimes intuitive seems to take direction from a higher power, the spirit, that thing that we think that motivates all of life. However, intuitive learners may need help in working through the process to reach the desired end result. So in other words, intuitive learners sometimes, because they're got so much going on, they tend to wander and their ideas have a lot of legs. And before you know it, they never get to the destination because they're so busy doing other things. They are very deep into themselves and may need help in coming out and connecting to people and understanding how others process thoughts and feelings. So an intuitive learner sometimes can be a little less tolerant of others, saying, well, I got there, or I'm going there, how come you can't go there? Now, again, these are real kind of general ideas in that. There was more in this manual to take a look at how these learning styles take place. But now let's imagine you walk into a classroom in Indigenous studies and there's 30 people sitting there. They might have very many variations of this learning styles. You just get up there and start lecturing or show a film and have a quiz. You're going to reach some people at different levels, but you're not going to really reach everybody effectively because people are looking more for a relationship. They want a different kind of exchange. So I've had to learn that myself. To become a good educator, you have to, in one session, vary the ways in which you're presenting information. So yeah, you can have a lecture, you can have group work, you can have a video, you can do some creative work. There's other things you got to do. You can't reach everybody with every lesson, but I think the educators are becoming more hip to the idea that you have to vary your learning styles. For us, Native people, generally, we like to go out on the land. We like to be out there, go on a medicine walk to teach us about plants. So just show us that. It doesn't matter what the scientific name of the plant is, but if you tell us that's what the plant looks like, here's what it does, and then we do a ceremony, and then we take that plant and prepare it, and then you actually drink it or use it, you're going to remember that for the rest of your life. So there's a different kind of learning style based upon what you need. And I think that for Indigenous people generally, that experiential learning, hands-on learning, here's a good idea. There's a theory, and you might want to try this sometime because I'm not sure it's true, but it sounds good. We used to teach or transfer knowledge. Let's just say we're braiding corn. It's a laborious process. So somebody might be singing a song about corn, and you remember that. Somebody might be telling you a story as you're braiding the corn. As you're busy braiding the corn, they're telling you the story. The indigenous theory is that story goes deeper into your memory. If you're beating while somebody's talking, if you're doing something. Because what they're finding now in universities is that everybody's got a computer. Everybody's typing the notes, what the instructor is saying. but it's like it's not going into their head. It's just going from the mouth of the instructor to their fingertips into the computer. So they'll have a complete record of what was said, but they didn't kind of experience that transmission. You can imagine if you're in a classroom with 300 or 500 kids, that's even worse, right? So some big universities are actually thinking about banning the personal computer in the classroom, getting the students back to listen to so in other words, the act of writing versus typing, because you're forming the words differently. You're thinking about them differently than when you're typing. Imagine if everybody in the classroom was beating while the instructor's talking. Are they going to learn better? I think that's something we might want to experiment with at Mohawk College, because there's an assumption that it's true. But I think a lot of it depends on, like, if you've never beaded before, oh man, that's you're thinking too much about what you're doing. But let's just say you've gone through that, began to bead that. So there's something to that. Or the other option would be, and this is very difficult then in a place like Mohawk, we're going to go somewhere together. We're going to do this activity. And as we're doing the activity, uh, the mentor is giving you some ideas to reflect on, but each one of you is reflecting on that personally with what you're doing. So say like collecting medicine plants. They'll tell you what to do. There's protocol. They'll tell you what to say, on how to think about it. But when you go and do it yourself, you experience it. And I can tell you, it's an unmeasurable thing that happens, because it's the power of belief that transforms it. Does that make sense? So if belief comes into that, in other words, if you believe in that plant and then you believe you should talk to it, if you believe that in taking it, its energy is going to come and help you, that's a whole different kind of transformative experience. It's very hard to codify in a quiz or a test. So we got two different systems here, two different measurements going on. And even with Indigenous people, they don't all rank the same level that we did in this test. So it can be very difficult sometimes to say, is there an Indigenous learning style, one style? Turns out there's probably many styles. And then how we've been trained to think and learn can both be an asset, but can also be a detriment. A lot of times we have a tendency to say that you have to learn how to read for comprehension and how to write well to communicate. Well, even though in my life I said, yeah, okay, that's true in the work that I do, it may not be true for a lot of our learners. We just have a difficult time reading a 15-page essay and try to derive what are they really trying to say. Why can't you just tell me what they're saying? Because that's kind of like the Indigenous part of it. We want to hear it from your voice to us. We want this relationship. Then when it comes time to write, and a lot of it has to do because we've been colonized over the generations to deny our feelings, to deny our intellect. And all of a sudden you're there trying to write and trying to make sense of something. I find that writing can be a very emotional experience for our people. But also because you're not used to expressing yourselves, that you kind of don't know how to say these things. On the other hand, some of our learners who have had strong mental skills, the words just flow, and they're very good writers. So you can't judge one better than the other because each one's a little different. And if it goes back to that old premise, not everybody can be a good singer, not everybody can be a good potter, but somebody needs to be doing that. We need all styles of learning in order to our society to work. So we don't put down a mental learner or an emotional learner. We need all of that together because here's what they used to tell me a long time ago, that the reason why we sit in a circle, particularly in council, let's just say the subject, the matter, the dilemma is put in the center of the circle. Everybody's gathered around it. Those of us sitting on this side of that problem see it a certain way. Those sitting on the other side can see it in a different way. Those sitting on that side. So it takes the collective view of everybody in that circle looking at that same thing. And those different points of view can help us assess what it really is. If we were just all sitting on one side, like kind of like a classroom, right? Instructor up front, everybody in a row, we might actually miss the fuller dimension of whatever it is we're talking about. And then it's a matter of negotiation, in the council. The chiefs keep talking about things, talking. What did you see? What did you say? What do you think? What did the old people say about that? What should we be concerned about? They're given some basic instructions. When you make a decision, think about how this decision is going to perpetuate the peace among our people. Think about how it's going to maintain the harmony with our mother, the earth, and think about how it's going to give the future generations an opportunity to live well. So, in other words, those are the values that are put into decision making, which is another kind of learning by doing. If you apply those principles, then hopefully your decision will be good for the benefit of everybody. So, so anyway, that's there's a lot more. We can get to that. I did send in a more detailed summary of this assessment tool and the kind of the meaning of all of that. But let's talk a little bit. So, how did your assessment line up with what you thought about yourself, or was it surprising?
I think for myself, I think that I'm not too surprised. I think that actually I'm a little surprised that I'm more physical than I thought. But the emotional, relational, and having that tie with the physical, it does make sense now that I look at it. And that I'm less mental. That's not too surprising to me either. So I guess a little bit of both.
Tanya, how about you?
I'm not surprised about mine. My emotional, relatable. That's how I am with everything. Like, I think I'm a very emotional person, and I like to connect with people. And I think that's how I am. Mental is I was only 2, and like I that's why I'm surprised. Like I'm surprised that I work at a college, and I'm also I go to university too right now. And I'm surprised because I haven't been a person who likes school and that kind of thing. When I think of school, I'm like, ew.
Same as me.
But I think my job though is where I connect with students like emotionally and help them. So when they need something or need to, so that's me. That's how I am. I like to connect with students and help them and make sure they're okay. But the fact that I work at a college and I go to university right now is not how I ever pictured myself being. But yeah, I agree with my results.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that, Tanya, because I'm surprised too. I never saw myself working at a college, and now I'm also taking a university degree, and but I don't particularly enjoy it. I like the same thing. It's like helping students and helping guide them and teaching where I love to teach, actually. That's when I know that I've learned something, is when I feel comfortable teaching, is when I get to that point. And I love sharing. I love doing that stuff. So
I actually worked at Hamilton Indian Center, and I taught prenatal classes for 15 years, prenatal, like parenting and everything. And what I would do is, like, my students or my participants, they wouldn't open up with me and discuss anything if I was teaching the lesson. So I always had craft time after the lesson where we would bead or make crafts. And then that's where my participants would open up and ask questions, and we'd all sit and talk with each other. And I think that's where we all learned the most, is in the group while we were doing crafts after my actual lesson. So I
Smart.
agree.
Mm-hmm.
There was some additional information in, so let's just say you have emotional relational learners, of the kinds of tasks and activities you could do for them to help support their style of learning. Well, the first is role playing. That's a very interesting way in which you're engaging people who have this emotional relational inclination. And also role reversal. Okay, now you're going to play the judge in this situation, and so it's interesting to see that that could be a thing you could use in the classroom. Uh, Writing and retelling a personal story. Well, we all have a story. All of our stories are legitimate and important, but learning to share that story, I think, is very important to our people. Relational learners often use jokes or humor as a way of talking about things. One time, a friend of mine, he had a kind of a strange thing when he was talking about what happened to our people, and all of the tragedy and the violence and the massacres. It would make him laugh. In other words, laughing was his defensive mechanism towards that. But it kind of put off the students because they thought they expected you to be depressed about these kind of things. So sometimes our body language and the way that we react to something can be a little off-putting to people because they don't understand that. That's our way of doing that. Scavenger hunt can be used in the classroom. They're looking for things and trying to find these things. It's a lot easier, a lot interesting. Like one thing we do with my kids here, we always try to find a round stone out in the yard. Well, first of all, it just forces you to look a little harder at what is in the yard, trying to find it out. When you do, it makes it even more intriguing. Relational learners like to use circle, both in terms of how the class is organized and even in dealing with the matters. They like to do charades. They like to teach with props. As funny as it may sound, when I lecture a lot, I bring all kinds of things because to me, the things our ancestors made or that we make are the best demonstration of that philosophy. And they also like to do recordings. So in many ways, you could say our Zoom talks is part of our relational, emotional learning experience, because then even though people can't make the presentation today, they can tap into it and feel that it's a little bit more deeply connected to it. It's certainly a lot better than reading a book about the whole thing. Whereas the physical learners, which is also predominates in indigenous learning styles. Again, it's a physical activity. We don't all physical learners don't always like a strict framework. They like to do role playing as well. They like small group discussions. They like the hands-on projects, and they like to share their personal experiential stories. These are all interwoven, right? There's a little bit of us in each one of those learning styles, or a little bit of that learning style in each one of us. So we don't pick one or the other. So anyway, I think that gives us a better idea of some of the things that impact on how people learn, how they remember, and I think we need to continue to explore how this can be used in the work that we do here at Mohawk College, but also in everybody's personal life. So if you're finding you can't read well for comprehension, you can't write well, we got to find alternatives to help them express what it is that they're learning. You could use portfolios, you could let them, and now with the computer, it's amazing to me what the students can do to produce something that goes beyond just a written narrative. So assessing those things might be a little difficult down the road, but I think we need to start talking about that. What's the alternative to the standard requirements of the institution? Every course has a long list of learning objectives and how we achieve those. And I think as long as we achieve the objectives, this comprehension of information, the application of wisdom, a reflection upon that, but we don't always need a final exam or final paper to prove what the student has experienced and learned throughout the semester. But my experience also says we have to do something that's regular throughout the semester, so somebody's getting it, or they're getting along with it, because we also have a tendency sometimes to, because of this emotional relationship thing, we get so wound up in it, we forget that we have to keep sharing what it is that we have learned with the instructor. So in other words, somebody sitting there quiet doesn't participate, that doesn't mean they're not learning. but we got to find ways for those quiet people, for those who don't want to write, or for those that are having a difficult time doing the assignments, alternatives to that. So those are the ideas anyways I kind of want to share with you today. I hope that you find it intriguing. Like I said, with this handout, we can take this further, but imagine if we did this exercise with our students every semester. Just it's a lot of fun to me. Gives you some ways to think about yourself and what you're learning. But once you learn that, then when you come into the classroom, you can talk to your instructor about that. Well, I'm more of an intuitive learner. I'm a little bit more of a relational learner. I need this kind of thing. And as long as we alert the faculty at Mohawk that such is possible, and I think they'd be more willing to adjust to that. So do we have any last comments or questions you may have about all of this?
I think that that covers things really, really well, and I really appreciate what you've been sharing. And that book that you were talking about from Diana Hill is called Native Learning.
Yes, so I on the PDF there, I did the cover page. It's
Okay.
Native Learning Styles is written by two people. So Diane was a contributor to it, which is probably why Diane Hill, not Diana.
Diana Hill.
But I do have a copy of the book somewhere. So these were just some pages that I had that I was able to copy. So Native Learning Styles, written by a guy named Michael Johnny, along with Diane Hill in 2002. So I think I can get one at goodminds.com. And when I get a chance to, I will, so we can have one for the office and maybe make a PDF of the whole thing. Because there's a whole lot more to that, to what I shared with you today. And then eventually, maybe we need to write one of our own.
Yeah, that it sounds like it would be a wonderful resource. And I think definitely it's something worth exploring as we're in this time of trying to make education safe again for our Indigenous students, and educating our faculty in how Indigenous learners learn. So that's it's a good start conversation. Let's start somewhere. So I appreciate that.
Okay, well, thanks for your time today, and I hope there's some things to think about down the road, and I'm sure we'll connect again at some other Zoom land.
Miigwech,
Thank you
Nyawe,
very
Rick,
much for your time.
yes, likewise.